Calantha Hopper never considered herself a risk-taker. Her days usually played out in the same careful rhythm, leaving little room for spontaneity. She lived in a modest cottage on the outskirts of town and filled her hours volunteering at the local animal shelter. When she wasn't attending to the needs of abandoned pets, she immersed herself in thick historical novels that transported her to eras filled with romance and gallantry. As much as she admired grand, sweeping tales, she firmly believed that such adventures were meant for other people, not for her. That belief, however, began to falter one late spring evening, when a single impulsive decision sent her on a path that would upend her predictable life. It all started the night her friend Abilene, someone with an unquenchable thirst for social gatherings, managed to talk her into going to a friend of a friend's party in the city. Calantha hesitated at first, anxious about large crowds and wary of superficial chatter. Yet Abilene had a persuasive way about her, insisting that Calantha needed at least one evening of excitement to remember in an otherwise unremarkable week. With more reluctance than anticipation, Calantha found herself walking into a stylish, modern loft where music pulsed gently in the background and clusters of strangers mingled around tall cocktail tables. At first, Calantha stuck close to the entryway, discreetly surveying the scene. Sconces on the exposed brick walls cast warm, golden hues across the open space, giving the impression of an intimate gathering despite the growing number of guests. In the far corner, a DJ was blending atmospheric beats that vibrated through the floorboards. The air smelled of citrusy perfume, cologne, and the faint sweetness of spilled champagne. Calantha's nerves spiked for a moment. She worried she might be out of her depth here. The women seemed confident in stylish dresses that hugged every curve, while the men sported impeccably tailored blazers and easy smiles. Even her friend Abilene exuded a magnetic energy that put Calantha's reserved mannerisms to shame. Still, she tried to relax. Her simple emerald green dress wasn't flamboyant, but it suited her slender frame and brought out the depth of her hazel eyes. She wasn't aiming to attract attention, she just wanted to blend in while supporting her friend. Heading gingerly toward the small bar set up in a corner, she decided she would treat herself to something sweet, a fruity mocktail, perhaps. As she navigated through the throng of elbows and shifting bodies, she suddenly noticed a tall, athletic figure leaning casually against the bar, chatting with a group of acquaintances. At first glance, something about him appeared impossibly self-assured. He laughed in a way that suggested he was used to being at the center of attention. Though she tried to avert her gaze, something compelled her to look again. His name, she would soon learn, was Xander Croydon, and he had an undeniable presence. Even from a distance, she noticed the playful curve of his mouth, the way his gaze darted around the room as if each moment offered a new opportunity for excitement. She found herself torn between curiosity and an instinctive wariness. She had known men like him, or at least she thought she had. Confident, perhaps even brash, used to having women gravitate toward them. It wasn't the type she usually felt comfortable around. Without realizing it, Calantha drifted closer, attempting to maneuver around people jockeying for the bartender's attention. She reached for a napkin on the bar, simultaneously trying to step away from a laughing group nearby. In that split second, her elbow grazed Xander's glass, sending a cool rush of liquid sloshing out of it and across the polished wooden surface. "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry," she blurted, heat rushing to her cheeks. The last thing she wanted was to draw attention through clumsiness, especially not in front of someone so self-possessed. Xander reacted with surprising grace. He jerked his hand back just in time to avoid most of the spill, but a few droplets still splattered the cuff of his shirt. Any other person might have been annoyed, but Xander tilted his head, his expression shifting from surprise to mild amusement. "No harm done. I was ready for a refill anyway." Despite her embarrassment, Calantha let out a soft laugh of relief. The tension in her shoulders eased a fraction. "Let me at least get you a napkin." While she dabbed the small stain, he introduced himself with a wry grin, assuring her again that it was just an accident. Their first exchange was both awkward and oddly charged. She could sense his confidence but also noticed a hint of warmth in his tone. He was neither flustered nor arrogant about the mishap, which intrigued her. "I'm Calantha," she offered, setting aside the soaked napkins. I usually avoid situations where I can spill anyone's drink. My friend managed to drag me out tonight. Xander chuckled and leaned a little closer. The movement carried a casual intimacy. Lucky friend, or maybe lucky me. So, do you do this, knock a stranger's drink over, just to start a conversation, or is it all part of your plan to keep me intrigued? His teasing remark made her flush. She raised an eyebrow, not entirely certain if she should match his playful tone or remain politely distant. Must be my secret strategy, she said dryly. How else would I meet such interesting people? For a brief, charged moment, they locked eyes. The buzz of the crowd around them seemed to fade, just a little, as if they were momentarily cocooned in their own world. Calantha felt a peculiar tug in her chest. She knew nothing about him, except that he had an easy charm and a certain spark in his voice, but the energy he exuded was undeniable. Soon Abilene bounced over, brimming with excitement at finding Calantha actually talking to someone. She offered hurried introductions, but Xander waved off any attempt at formality, promptly inviting both of them to join a small circle of his friends. Calantha was hesitant. She'd come fully expecting to slip into the background, stay for half an hour, and politely excuse herself. The notion of socializing with a group of strangers made her anxious. Yet something in Xander's open stance and the unaffected way he gestured to her prompted her to step forward instead of away. Within minutes, she was drawn into a spirited conversation about music, travel, and favorite hole-in-the-wall eateries around the city. Though she spoke less than the others, listening to their stories and observations felt surprisingly comfortable. Every now and then, her gaze collided with Xander's from across the circle. His dark eyes held a gleam that seemed to say, I see you, and I'm curious about you. She found that sensation both thrilling and slightly unnerving. By the end of the evening, Calantha's cheeks ached from smiling more than she had in months. She had expected to feel out of place, to count the minutes until she could politely slip away. Instead, the hours flew by, leaving her unprepared for how easy, almost too easy, it felt to let her guard down. Abilene teased her gently about being so engrossed in conversation, and Calantha merely shrugged, not quite ready to analyze the strange warmth settling in her chest. It was only on the car ride home, the city lights flashing by like gold and silver in the darkness, that Calantha let the reality sink in. She'd allowed herself a taste of unpredictable excitement, and it both thrilled and terrified her. Xander Croydon was unlike anyone she usually encountered in her quiet life. She caught herself wondering if he would call or if she should reach out first. Perhaps she was getting ahead of herself, after all, they'd just met. And yet she knew, deep down, that a door had opened somewhere within her, a door she never expected to unlock. That night, as she curled up in her tiny bedroom, trying to recall the exact timbre of his laughter, she felt a flicker of something new, something that promised both exhilaration and risk. She didn't have the answers, but for the first time in a long while, she found herself not minding the uncertainty. Calantha Hopper tried to settle back into her usual routine in the days that followed the party. She woke early each morning to brew coffee in her small, cozy kitchen, then drove the winding road to the animal shelter where she volunteered. Her hours there were usually tranquil, spent organizing medical charts, administering food and water, or consoling frightened dogs as they adjusted to unfamiliar surroundings. Despite the comforting predictability of her tasks, she found her mind drifting to the events of the party, most of all, to Xander Croydon's confident smile and the subtle spark of intrigue she had felt in his presence. Every time she recalled the way he had turned a near spill into a light-hearted moment, a tiny tingle of excitement rippled through her. Her friend Abilene kept asking if Xander had reached out, only to receive a slight shrug in return. Calantha truly didn't know how to describe her feelings or what to expect next. Part of her assumed that the night they met was simply a passing collision of two different worlds. He probably went on to another gathering, full of fresh faces, while she remained here, in her familiar environment. After all, their lifestyles seemed so different. Yet she couldn't quite forget how he'd looked at her as though he already knew some hidden part of her. It left her paradoxically eager and uneasy at the same time. Early one afternoon, she was at the shelter's front desk, preparing a binder of adoption paperwork, when the glass door swung open. She barely glanced up, expecting it to be a regular volunteer or a family looking to adopt a puppy. Only the strong, self-assured footsteps caused her to look more carefully. Standing just inside, wearing a casual t-shirt and jeans, was Xander Croydon, holding a timid little dog in his arms. The sight of him there was so unexpected that she momentarily froze, pressing her lips together in surprise. He walked toward her with the easy confidence she remembered, but there was also a gentleness in the way he supported the trembling dog against his chest. Calantha's heart picked up speed, though she tried to maintain her composure, greeting him with a polite, slightly reserved nod. He explained that he had found the animal wandering near a busy intersection, limping and clearly malnourished. Unsure of what to do, he had brought the dog to the shelter, hoping the staff could help nurse it back to health. His explanation wasn't formal or rehearsed, it sounded more like genuine concern. Calantha motioned for him to follow her into the examination area, a room lined with metal cages and supply shelves. The overhead lights were bright, but the corners were full of shadows that stretched as the day wore on. She waved for one of the staff veterinarians to join them, who took the dog carefully and promised to check for injuries. With the vet now focused on the dog, Xander and Calantha stepped back, giving space for a proper examination. For a moment, they faced each other amid the echoes of barking and the metallic clang of cages opening and closing. Xander let out a low chuckle, as if marveling at their unexpected reunion. He glanced around at the rows of enclosures, each housing a forlorn or hopeful creature. "So, this is what your everyday life is like?" he asked, softly so as not to startle any of the animals. "I can see why you love it. Helping these guys is, well, it feels good." She tried to gauge his sincerity, somewhat taken aback at the calm respect in his voice. He didn't look bored or impatient, he looked genuinely fascinated. Despite her wariness, she still felt uncertain how to read a man who seemed so effortlessly charismatic. She allowed herself a faint smile. "It's not always easy, but I believe it's worth it. Each adoption makes all the struggles worthwhile." He nodded, and for a moment they simply stood in shared silence. Calantha noticed the flicker in his eyes, the same one she'd glimpsed during their first meeting. She couldn't figure out why he seemed to take such interest in her world. People with his kind of energy often found volunteer work too slow-paced. Yet here he was, calmly stroking the back of his hand where the little dog's paw had been resting just moments ago. The fleeting vulnerability that crossed his features softened her guarded attitude, if only slightly. When the vet called them over to discuss the dog's condition, Calantha listened carefully to the plan of treatment, while Xander asked his own surprisingly thoughtful questions. The dog seemed to have a sprained leg and clear signs of neglect, but would likely recover under proper care. Xander insisted he wanted updates and asked if there was a chance he could foster the dog once it recovered enough to leave the medical unit. His genuine concern caught Calantha off guard. She had assumed, if she ever did see him again, it would be at another social event, not here in the practical environment of the shelter. After the medical briefing was finished, Calantha led Xander out of the exam room to the front lobby. The late afternoon light filtered in from the street, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. They paused by a bulletin board covered with photos of available animals, success stories, and thank you cards from previous adopters. She busied herself for a moment, straightening a few pinned flyers, anything to avoid letting the quiet tension between them grow too powerful. Eventually, she cleared her throat and asked if he'd like to fill out some initial paperwork for fostering. He agreed, and as she handed him a clipboard, their fingers grazed. That small point of contact sent a small current of awareness through her. She resisted the urge to retreat, reminding herself that her job was to facilitate adoptions and fosters, nothing more. Yet she couldn't help noticing how the overhead lights revealed a faint bruise near his wrist, presumably from handling the frightened dog. She felt a sudden wave of empathy. He was apparently willing to risk a nip or scratch if it meant rescuing an animal in need. The realization complicated the tidy assumptions she had made about him. Once he was done with the paperwork, they stood in awkward silence, neither sure how to wrap up this unexpectedly charged meeting. Finally, Xander tucked the pen behind the clipboard and offered Calantha a half-smile. "Thank you for helping me with this. I didn't know if showing up here like this would be weird. I just wanted to make sure the dog got proper care." She exhaled slowly, admitting to herself that she was moved by his commitment. "I'm glad you did. It's not every day someone brings in an injured animal and asks to take personal responsibility. I can text you updates about how he's doing, if you'd like." He nodded, his tone quiet, as though the animals around them compelled a sense of reverence. "Yeah, I'd like that a lot. And maybe you and I could grab coffee sometime, just to talk about the foster process. Or anything else." There was a subtle shift in his voice, an openness that suggested he was conscious of how easily she might refuse. She hesitated, weighing her options. The memory of the party still felt so vivid, the easy banter, the flash of attraction, but she also remembered her caution, her preference for a life with fewer complications. Still, she owed it to herself to not slam the door on something that could be meaningful. "Coffee," she repeated, almost tasting the word. "Sure. Let's plan on it, once the dog's settled, and we see how everything goes." They exchanged numbers, though they already had them from that party's last-minute flurry of contact info swaps. This time, however, it felt more deliberate, a handshake between two people deciding there might be something worth exploring. Even so, as he walked out, leaving her standing in the stillness of the shelter's lobby, Calantha had trouble containing her own conflicting emotions. Part of her was thrilled at the idea of seeing him again under more relaxed circumstances, getting to know the man who had so casually strolled into her life. Another part was anxious, she feared that letting him into her thoughts and daily routine could upend the delicate balance she cherished. That evening, when she closed up the shelter and turned off each set of lights, she couldn't help imagining him out there somewhere, likely heading back into the city. The hum of the fluorescent lamps dying down reminded her of how quiet her existence was compared to his. Yet the dog he brought in was safely resting, a testament to his genuine kindness. She found it unsettling that someone with his confident aura had shown such empathy for a wounded creature. It was easier to categorize people in neat little boxes, the carefree types who breezed in and out of parties versus the conscientious souls who rescued abandoned dogs. Xander, it seemed, straddled both worlds, and the contradiction both fascinated and unnerved her. Late that night, she stood by her bedroom window, listening to the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Each time she closed her eyes, she pictured his expression when the veterinarian explained the dog's injuries. The gentle worry in his gaze was so unlike the cocky grin he had flashed at the party. It made her wonder if she actually understood him at all, or if there were layers to him she was only just beginning to see. She fell asleep with her thoughts spinning, torn between her tendency to play it safe and the flicker of excitement urging her to wander outside her comfort zone. As her breathing steadied and she drifted into slumber, she couldn't have guessed how deeply this unplanned encounter would shape the days, and nights, to come. In that single meeting, beneath the bright lights of the shelter's exam room and in the hush of the lobby, a small but potent connection had begun to form. It felt at once delicate and electric, leaving her with a mounting curiosity about who Xander really was, and what it might mean to let him become part of her carefully guarded life. Early the next morning, Calantha woke to the soft chime of her phone. The sun had barely risen, sending only weak rays through the sheer curtains in her bedroom. With a sleepy hand, she reached for the device and blinked at the screen, trying to clear her vision. A single text message glowed, "Good morning. How's our little friend doing? Xander." The simple words made her heart give a sudden jolt, stirring memories of his unexpected visit to the animal shelter. She had promised to update him about the dog's recovery, but she hadn't anticipated him reaching out so soon, nor with such genuine concern. She pushed away the lingering threads of sleep, sat up against her pillows, and tapped out a response. She let him know that the dog seemed to be responding well to the pain medication, but would need a few more days of rest before they could consider a foster arrangement. With the phone still in her lap, she paused. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she debated whether to add anything personal, something that might suggest she was open to more than just small talk about the dog. In the end, she pressed send without further elaboration, feeling a slight pang of regret as she set the phone aside. The rest of her morning was a flurry of habitual activity. She tidied her modest living space and made a quick breakfast, telling herself it was foolish to wait for a reply. Yet every few minutes, she found herself glancing at her silent phone, wondering if Xander might text again or call. Finally, she forced herself to leave the house and drive to the shelter, hoping the commotion of caring for the animals would keep her mind occupied. When she arrived, the place was already coming to life. Several volunteers were guiding dogs out to a fenced courtyard for their morning exercise, and a pair of cats napped in a sun-drenched window. Calantha's eyes swept across the hallway leading to the medical wing, where the newly rescued dog was being monitored. She made a beeline in that direction, keen to see how he was doing after the previous day's treatment. Her colleague, Dr. Manuela Pierce, a no-nonsense veterinarian, greeted her with a slight nod. "Your friend's dog is healing well," Dr. Pierce said, scribbling notes on a clipboard. "The leg is still tender, but as soon as we're sure there's no infection, we can move him to a quieter space. If Xander is serious about fostering, we could probably release the dog into his care in about a week." Calantha acknowledged the update with a grateful smile, but a question gnawed at her: was Xander truly serious about fostering, or had he been caught up in the emotion of rescue? It was easy to say the right things in the heat of the moment. She thanked Dr. Pierce and crouched by the kennel where the little dog rested, tail thumping softly against the floor as she neared. "You've got someone out there who cares about you," she whispered, sliding her hand through the bars. The dog licked her fingers, and she couldn't help feeling a gentle wave of optimism. That optimism carried her through most of the day, until mid-afternoon, when the shelter's front desk volunteer waved her over. "Someone's here to see you," the volunteer said, a curious smile dancing on her face. Calantha peeked around the corner, and her breath caught. There, casually leaning against the reception counter, was Xander. He held a small bouquet of daisies, simple, bright, and just the right balance of earnestness and informality. Heat rushed to Calantha's cheeks. She smoothed her shirt and tried to adopt a professional, composed demeanor as she approached. "Hi," she managed, noticing that her tone sounded more breathless than she intended. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." Xander shrugged, offering her the daisies. "I wanted to drop these off as a thank you for taking care of our patient. Not sure if flowers are allowed in the back, but at least they might brighten the lobby." She accepted the bouquet, struck by the thoughtfulness behind such a gesture. "They're lovely," she said softly, glancing at the speckled petals. "Thank you. I'm sure everyone here will appreciate them." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Though he carried himself with the same easy confidence as before, there was a certain nervous energy about him, as if he wasn't quite sure how she would react to his presence. "Could we talk somewhere?" he asked, lowering his voice so as not to disturb the visitors browsing the adoption boards on the wall. "Just for a few minutes. Maybe catch up about the dog and other things." Calantha found herself nodding before her mind caught up to the action. Leading him down a hallway to a staff lounge that was empty at this hour, she tried to keep her breathing steady. The room was cozy but functional, with mismatched chairs around a circular table, a vending machine humming softly in the corner, and the faint smell of microwaved leftovers lingering in the air. They sat down, daisies in her hand, an unspoken tension stretched between them. Finally, she broke the silence, forcing herself to sound casual. "The dog's improving, thanks in large part to your quick action. He'll be on track for fostering soon, if you're still interested." Xander leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Absolutely still interested. I promised myself I'd do right by that little guy." He paused, studying her face. "But that's not the only reason I'm here." Her heart fluttered, and she hoped her expression remained neutral. She could sense him choosing his words with care. "Look," he said, exhaling slowly, "the night of that party, I admit I was drawn to you. But I didn't expect to see you again so soon either, especially not under these circumstances. And I certainly didn't plan for you to be so hard to get out of my head. A faint grin tugged at the corner of his mouth, as though he himself was a bit surprised at his confession. Calantha felt warmth bloom in her chest, accompanied by a twinge of caution. She remembered how easily men could say flattering things, how quickly they could vanish when the novelty wore off. At the same time, she couldn't deny her own intrigue. I guess I have to thank your good deed for bringing you back here, she replied, her voice soft but steady. What is it you're looking for exactly? He glanced at the daisies in her hand, then back at her eyes. A chance, maybe. To see if there's something worth exploring between us. Coffee, lunch, anything, somewhere that's not a loud party or a busy animal shelter. His expression was almost boyish now, as though he was wary of rejection. She swallowed the knot forming in her throat. A part of her thrilled at his suggestion, but another part, still so firmly rooted in her methodical life, warned her to tread carefully. Let's start with coffee, she managed. Though I feel I should warn you, I'm pretty committed to my routines. I'm not really the spontaneous type. I can work with that, he said, a hint of laughter in his tone. His gaze was unflinching, warm, confident in a way that made her pulse skitter. I appreciate honesty more than anything else. Their conversation ebbed and flowed for a few more minutes, touching on small details, her volunteer schedule, his flexible jobs, the half-formed plan of taking the injured dog into his home. Every so often, the hum of the vending machine or the muffled bark of a dog in the distance would remind Calantha where they were, and a flicker of anxiety danced in her stomach. She wasn't used to mixing personal affections with her work environment, but it felt oddly natural talking to Xander in that unremarkable lounge. When he finally took his leave, the daisies stayed behind on the staff table. Calantha explained that they would brighten the place for everyone, and Xander grinned in understanding. Before stepping out, he looked at her, his voice hushed as though they were sharing a secret. Let me know when you're free for coffee, I'll work around your schedule. Then, with a quick wave, he was gone, leaving her simultaneously relieved and unsettled by his presence. For the rest of her shift, she felt as though a current of electricity crackled in the air. A coworker teased her about the sudden flush in her cheeks, and she deflected the question with a vague smile. The repeated ring of phones, the shuffle of adoption papers, and even the gentle chaos of mealtime for the animals all seemed to pass in a blur. By the time she clocked out, she realized she had barely processed her own feelings. She only knew she wanted to see him again, if for no other reason than to figure out what, exactly, lay behind that bold smile and caring heart. Later, at home, she found a quiet moment in her small living room. She stood by a wide window that looked out onto a sprawling oak tree, leaves shimmering in the evening light. With a sigh, she allowed herself to reflect on the day, Xander's surprise visit, the unexpected offer of flowers, and his candid desire to know her better. The more she thought about it, the more she felt a gentle tug in her chest, like she was being pulled towards something unknown and possibly wondrous. Yet a small edge of trepidation remained. She had never been one to leap before looking, and the idea of venturing into a relationship with someone she'd met under such unpredictable circumstances unsettled the cautious part of her nature. One thing she couldn't deny, though, if she shut down every impulse to reach for something new, she might miss out on a depth of happiness she'd only ever read about in her favorite novels. As dusk settled, painting the sky with streaks of lavender and rose, she finally texted him a simple invitation: could we meet for coffee this weekend? Let me know. The words sat on her screen, vulnerable and unadorned, until she hit send. No sooner had she done so than she felt a surge of relief and anticipation wash over her. Whether the decision would lead to delight or heartbreak, she resolved that maybe this time, taking a small risk was worth the uncertainty. By the time she turned off the lights and went to bed, her mind whirled with possibilities. She pictured Xander's earnest expression in the lounge, the determined way he had cradled the injured dog, and the assured confidence woven through his smile. Something about him evoked a strange mixture of comfort and exhilaration, as if each moment shared was charged with potential. And though she usually found solace in routines and careful planning, she couldn't deny the subtle thrill she felt at the idea of breaking her own rules. This, after all, was the very thing she told herself she wanted, a life more fully lived, a chance to embrace the unexpected. Calantha arrived at the cafe a few minutes early, her stomach a tight knot of anticipation. She chose a small table near the window, where she could see the street outside, pedestrians hurrying on their way, a flutter of leaves blowing across the sidewalk. Her mind buzzed with a mixture of excitement and nerves, making it nearly impossible to focus on the menu. After a moment of restless scanning, she decided on a latte she never would have tried under normal circumstances. It felt right to be a bit spontaneous, given how quickly her life had shifted in the past week. Just as she finished placing her order with the barista, she spotted Xander crossing the street. He wore dark jeans and a neat button-down shirt that made him look casually polished. Her pulse quickened at the sight of him, an amalgam of confidence and warmth that managed to put her at ease and keep her on edge all at once. The late afternoon sun cast a glow on his hair, and the crisp air carried the promise of autumn. He stepped inside with an unhurried grace, his gaze sweeping the bustling cafe until he found her. As he approached, Calantha caught a hint of cologne mixed with the coffee-scented air. For a moment, they just looked at each other, smiling, as though both were pleased yet slightly astonished to be sharing this moment. "I hope I'm not late," he said in a low voice, setting his keys on the table before sitting across from her. "Traffic was surprisingly smooth, so I ended up taking the scenic route." She shook her head. "Not late at all. I was early. I like to arrive before everyone else, it gives me time to get settled." He chuckled, glancing around at the cafe's warm, eclectic decor, mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus, and potted herbs along the windowsill. "I can already guess that's your style, neat, thoughtful, prepared. I hope I'm not too disruptive to that routine." His comment was playful, but it carried a ring of truth. She felt that gentle friction between their personalities, the way he reveled in the unpredictable while she found comfort in the familiar. It was both unsettling and strangely alluring. "You've already disrupted it," she admitted, finding her own boldness surprising, "but so far, I don't mind." Their drinks arrived shortly after. He sipped his black coffee, and she took a cautious first taste of her sweet, frothy latte. For a few moments, they chatted about mundane things, her morning at the shelter, his attempt at an early workout, the changing weather. The tension that had been building in her chest slowly eased into a pleasant hum, a subtle current of excitement rather than nervousness. Eventually, curiosity got the better of her. "You mentioned you take on different jobs here and there, but you never really told me what that means. Are you freelance? Or do you prefer to keep your options open?" Xander set down his cup, leaning forward with a thoughtful expression. "A bit of both. I started out in construction right after high school, worked my way through various apprenticeships. That led me to take on odd gigs for friends or businesses that needed renovations. Sometimes I do short-term projects if I see a place that has potential for a flip." He shrugged, a small, self-deprecating smile on his face. "I guess you could call me a wanderer, career-wise. I'm not afraid to drop something if it stops making sense or starts feeling stifling." Calantha nodded, turning the rim of her cup between her fingers. "I admire your bravery. I'm the type to cling to what's safe, to what's proven stable. I'm not sure I'd have the courage to jump from one project to another without a guaranteed plan." His gaze was steady. "There's a flip side to it. Sometimes it means I don't have steady work or that I need to hustle for new clients. It's not always glamorous. But it does let me live life on my own terms, at least so far." She saw a flicker of sincerity beneath his casual explanation, the vulnerability of someone who'd learned to rely on himself more than on any institution or system. It made her own cautious approach to life feel suddenly narrow, though she knew her caution was born from experience and a desire for security. They finished their drinks, letting the conversation drift back to the shelter. Xander asked for updates on the injured dog, and Calantha recounted that the recovery was on schedule. She admitted she was touched that he seemed genuinely concerned, repeatedly asking whether he needed to buy a special kind of dog bed or if the shelter had enough blankets. His questions were earnest, unforced. When they finally rose from the table, neither seemed eager to leave. Xander glanced outside, where the sky was turning from bright blue to soft, dusky lavender. "Want to walk for a bit?" he asked. "Maybe stretch our legs before we head home." Calantha hesitated, but only briefly. She nodded, realizing she wasn't ready for the evening to end. They stepped onto the sidewalk, the cool air nipping at their cheeks. The cafe's neon sign buzzed faintly in the background, and the faint hum of traffic accompanied their footsteps. A few blocks down, they passed a brick wall covered in an elaborate mural. The vibrant swirls of color and whimsical shapes caught Calantha's eye. She paused, taking it in, and Xander stopped beside her, hands in his pockets. "It's beautiful," she murmured, examining the details of the painted birds and rolling hills. He moved just a fraction closer, enough that she could feel his warmth in the chilly air. "I'm glad we did this," he said quietly, glancing at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "I wasn't sure how you'd feel about meeting me again outside the shelter. But I wanted you to know. I'm not just a guy who rescues a dog on a whim. You matter, too." Calantha heard the honesty in his voice, felt the gentle pull in her chest that both thrilled and unbalanced her. It was one thing to find him physically appealing or to appreciate the sweet gesture of daisies, it was another to realize he genuinely wanted to be part of her life, if she'd let him. The moment lengthened. She could see the faint reflection of the mural's colors dancing in his eyes, a kaleidoscope of possibility. For the first time in a long while, she found herself wanting to step beyond her usual boundaries, to take a chance on something that might not be predictable. So she allowed a small, sincere smile to lift her lips, reached out, and lightly brushed her fingers against his. It was a fleeting touch, yet brimming with promise. They continued walking, side by side, their conversation weaving between laughter and quiet revelations, each moment adding a new thread to the uncertain but captivating bond forming between them. When they finally parted ways, night had fully descended, but the warmth of their shared time lingered in the autumn air. Calantha returned home with a fluttering heart and a mind alive with anticipation, caught between the comforting tug of her routines and the growing possibility that her life might just become as vibrant and unpredictable as the mural's wild flourish of colors. Over the following week, Calantha found her routine pleasantly disrupted. She still rose at daybreak to make coffee in her tiny kitchen, still drove the winding road to the shelter, and still spent her hours prepping paperwork and feeding puppies. But she carried an unspoken anticipation each morning, a subtle awareness that her phone could buzz with a message from Xander at any moment. Sometimes it was just a friendly greeting, "Good luck at the shelter today." Other times a simple note about the injured dog's progress, "We're all set for the foster whenever he's ready." Every text, no matter how brief, brightened her day like a ray of sun breaking through autumn clouds. By midweek, Dr. Pierce deemed the dog healed enough for a trial foster arrangement. She warned Calantha that the dog, still skittish around sudden noises, might need patient handling. Calantha conveyed every detail to Xander, half expecting him to balk at the extra work. Yet he seemed only more determined. Early one crisp Thursday morning, he arrived at the shelter in a pickup truck with a blanket-lined crate in the back seat, along with a bag of puppy-friendly food and a plush bed. The thoroughness of his preparations left Calantha speechless in the best way possible. She had never been so aware of someone making genuine efforts simply because they cared. As they stood in the lobby, waiting for final signatures, the dog perched in Xander's arms, tail half wagging and half tucked. Calantha could see uncertainty flickering in the dog's eyes, fear of the unknown mixing with the hope of a better life. Xander stroked the mottled fur gently, murmuring reassurances. The staff at the shelter crowded around, offering final tips and excited well wishes. Watching him soak in their advice with absolute focus, Calantha felt that swelling warmth in her chest again, the same sensation she'd experienced over coffee. It was hard to reconcile his earlier image, the confident, joking presence at a late-night party, with this quietly devoted man intent on giving a vulnerable creature another chance. When all the forms were signed, Calantha walked him out to the parking lot. The late morning sunlight cast a brilliant sheen on the truck's windshield, nearly blinding her. She turned away from the glare and found Xander watching her with a look of gentle amusement. "I'm going to do everything I can for him," he said, nodding to the dog now curled up on the front seat. "You'll come by and check on us, right? Make sure I'm not messing anything up." She laughed lightly, warmth flooding her cheeks. "I'll do that," she promised. "And if you have any questions, about his diet, his exercise, his comfort, call me any time." She hesitated, then added, "Or just call me for no reason at all. I mean, if you'd like." The words came out awkwardly, but Xander's smile widened. "You sure you want me calling you in the middle of the night, telling you the dog's hogging all the blankets?" he teased, gently bumping her shoulder with his own. She rolled her eyes in feigned exasperation, though she couldn't hide her grin. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Now go." He looks eager to head off on his new adventure. He nodded, but before climbing into the truck, he leaned down and placed a soft, fleeting kiss against her temple. She caught her breath. It was such a small gesture, yet it sent a thrilling current through her. He gave her one last look, hopeful, brimming with promises unspoken, then started the engine and pulled away. Calantha stood there in the parking lot, hands pressed over the sudden flutter in her chest. She had the keen sense that this budding connection between them was about more than just the dog. It was about trust, compassion, and the willingness to let someone into your carefully walled world. She returned to work floating on a cloud of optimism, busying herself with tasks until the afternoon lull hit. Then she slipped into one of the shelter's break rooms, poured a cup of herbal tea, and scrolled through her phone. The day's routine humdrum, reminders from the vet, a group message from Abilene about an upcoming birthday event, was overshadowed by the lingering warmth of Xander's presence. She wondered if he was all right, if the dog had finally settled, if the drive to his place had gone smoothly. A part of her itched to call, just to hear his voice. But she resisted, not wanting to seem overly eager. At least, not yet. That weekend, she had a rare Saturday off. Rather than sleeping in, she woke early and decided to visit the local farmer's market. She ambled between the rows of colorful produce, inhaling the scents of fresh bread and cinnamon pastries. Usually, she enjoyed doing this alone, browsing stalls at her own pace, exchanging polite greetings with vendors. But she discovered her thoughts kept drifting to Xander, imagining how he might appreciate a crate of ripe peaches or the wildflower honey local beekeepers sold. Halfway through the market, she realized she had already purchased more than she needed: a bouquet of sunflowers, homemade jam, 2 loaves of sourdough bread. She paused at a stall selling handcrafted pottery and tapped out a text on her phone: "Hope you and our furry friend survived your first night together. How's it going?" She told herself not to watch the screen too intently for a reply. Yet mere seconds later, the device buzzed in her hand. Xander's message came through, filled with good-natured exasperation. "He's adorable, but he's already tried to eat my couch cushions. Bring reinforcements if you're free, maybe some advice on dog-proofing an apartment." A soft laugh escaped her, earning a curious glance from an elderly woman browsing clay mugs beside her. Calantha quickly gathered her purchases, heart pounding at the prospect of seeing him again. She stowed everything in her car and sent a confirming text: "I'll be there in an hour, couch doctor on call." She arrived at his building, an older, renovated warehouse in a transitional neighborhood, and was greeted by the echo of barking even before she knocked on the apartment door. The moment he let her inside, the dog scampered up, tail wagging so furiously it blurred. Calantha crouched down to scratch the dog's ears, marveling at how much brighter and healthier he already seemed. The dog still had a slight limp, but he bounded around with curiosity, sniffing her shoes and the brown paper market bags she'd brought. "Hope it's okay that I brought supplies," she said, pulling out a plush chew toy, a rope tug, and a couple of treats. "They're not the most stylish, but they'll keep him from gnawing your furniture." Xander's grin was borderline radiant. "Okay. It's better than okay. You're saving my couch from certain doom." Then, seeing the extra loaf of bread and jar of honey she'd also packed, he added, "And I see you came prepared to feed me, too." "I couldn't help it," she admitted. "The market was too tempting. Besides, if I'm going to dog-proof your place, you might as well feed me something decent." His apartment was a comfortable mix of practicality and personality, wide windows let in abundant light, revealing rough wooden floors partially covered by a vintage rug. A half-finished bookshelf stood in one corner, tools scattered around it. Several bright paintings lined the walls, suggesting an unexpected artistic flair. Calantha felt a wave of admiration as she glanced around. This was his domain, a space he'd put together piece by piece, and it felt more real than any polished showplace she could imagine. They spent the afternoon mapping out corners where he could add baby gates or store fragile items out of the dog's reach. She demonstrated how to redirect the dog's attention to toys whenever he started nosing at pillows or cables, and Xander watched her carefully, occasionally letting out a sigh of relief that her tips seemed to work. In return, he toasted slices of fresh sourdough and served them with butter and the wildflower honey, the sweet warmth filling the apartment. Time passed in a blur of small shared tasks. He measured the threshold between rooms for a gate. She jotted down a list of safe chew alternatives. At one point, she glanced at the clock and realized they had been at it for hours. Yet she didn't feel tired, she felt oddly content, as though they were two pieces of a puzzle beginning to fit. When they finally paused for a break, the dog trotted over, licked Xander's hand, and then flopped into Calantha's lap with a satisfied groan. "He's definitely attached to you," Xander noted, resting an arm on the back of the couch. "Can't say I blame him." She lifted her gaze to see him watching her with a gentle, contemplative expression. "I like him too," she admitted, scritching behind the dog's ears. "And he's lucky you found him." A playful grin broke across Xander's face. "If he hadn't been on that street corner, though, I might not have had the excuse to come see you at the shelter. Maybe I owe him a lifetime supply of treats for that." She shook her head, cheeks flushing under the warmth of his stare. With a swift movement, the dog hopped off her lap, as though to investigate another corner of the apartment. That left Calantha suddenly, acutely aware of Xander's nearness. The light filtering in through the windows seemed to sharpen every detail, the slight scratch on his jaw, the flecks of gold in his eyes, the faint trace of sawdust on his shirt from the half-finished bookshelf. Slowly, he reached over and took her hand, guiding her to face him fully. "I like where this is going," he said quietly, as if admitting a secret. "But I also know you have your guard up sometimes. Let me know if I'm moving too fast." Her mind whirred, listing all the reasons she should be cautious: her structured life, her fear of heartbreak, her uncertainty about his free-spirited ways. Yet none of them felt strong enough to overshadow the genuine connection pulsing between them. She remembered the sensation of his gentle kiss on her temple, the comfort in how he stroked the dog's fur, the sincerity in his eyes each time he looked at her. So she shook her head and offered a small, grateful smile. "This might be the first time in a long while I don't mind the pace," she admitted, her voice hardly above a whisper. Whatever words lingered on his tongue were lost in the next second, as he bent closer, brushing his lips against hers in a tender, unhurried kiss. It was the kind of moment she'd only ever read about in fiction, simple yet startlingly real, filled with both promise and the faint tremor of uncertainty. Her heart thudded in her chest, and all the carefully constructed walls she'd once relied upon felt distant, irrelevant. When they pulled apart, the dog let out a short bark, as though reminding them of his presence. They both burst into quiet laughter, the tension diffused, replaced by an undeniable sense of warmth. Calantha felt as though the day had given her a glimpse into a new world, a messier, more improvised way of living, but one full of authenticity and heart. Long after she left his apartment, that feeling remained. Back at home, she sat on the edge of her bed, recalling the moment they'd first locked eyes at the party, then the day he showed up at the shelter, and everything that had transpired since. It felt as if she were assembling a mosaic, each unexpected encounter and heartfelt exchange adding another tile of color to her once monochromatic life. Climbing under the covers, she couldn't help smiling into the darkness, wondering what the following days would bring: challenges, undoubtedly, maybe even disagreements. But there was something profoundly right about the way Xander had come into her world and refused to let her hide behind her routines. For the first time in a very long time, she fell asleep not with her thoughts painstakingly ordered, but with her mind happily afloat in the unknown, eager to see what dawn would bring. For the next several days, Calantha found her life slipping into a rhythm that felt simultaneously familiar and utterly new. She still volunteered at the shelter every morning, greeting the other volunteers with her usual friendly nod. She still returned home each evening to the soft lamplight of her cozy living room, pausing to read a chapter or two from her favorite historical novels before bed. But woven into this dependable routine was the pulse of an evolving bond with Xander, a sense that at any moment, her phone might ring or he might text, and she would find herself drifting toward his orbit again. The rescued dog had quickly settled into Xander's apartment, thanks to the endless patience and affection he lavished on the animal. At the shelter, everyone seemed intrigued by her stories about Xander and the dog, with coworkers teasing her gently about her newfound glow. It was difficult to hide how much she looked forward to seeing him, and she realized she didn't truly want to hide it. For once, she let herself enjoy the rush of feeling connected to someone who was neither a colleague nor a lifelong friend, but someone new and unexpectedly important. On a cool Wednesday evening, she found herself stepping into Xander's building yet again, balancing a tote bag of takeout containers from her favorite Thai place. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and paint, and her footsteps echoed off the high ceilings. She climbed the stairs to his apartment, heart fluttering with anticipation. Since it was already dark, warm light spilled through the crack at the bottom of his door, and the muffled sound of a podcast or music drifted out. When she knocked, the dog barked twice in greeting. Xander answered a moment later, wearing sweatpants and a worn t-shirt splattered with flecks of paint. His hair looked slightly damp, as though he'd just stepped out of a shower. He grinned when he saw her, and the dog bounded over, tail wagging so fervently it knocked against the walls. "You're a lifesaver," Xander said, taking the tote bag from her arms. "I was planning on trying to cook, but the dog got into a wrestling match with one of my toolboxes, so dinner never happened." Calantha laughed, stepping inside. "Thai food to the rescue, then. Is the toolbox okay?" He rolled his eyes playfully, nudging the dog aside so she could pass. "I'm not worried about the toolbox, I'm worried about the dog. He's still a little skittish around metallic noises. Every time I move anything, he goes wild." Even as Xander spoke, he went to fetch plates and silverware, motioning for her to sit at the small kitchen table. Calantha looked around at the shelves he'd recently finished building. Once bare walls now held volumes of books and small, colorful sculptures. Some appeared to be handcrafted, others looked like thrift store finds. The apartment was starting to resemble a warm, lived-in space, full of personal touches that hinted at the layers of his personality. The dog followed her, pressing a cold nose against her palm as if asking for reassurance. She ruffled his ears, speaking softly. "You're lucky, you know. Most people wouldn't dedicate this much time and energy to making sure you feel safe." Xander overheard from the kitchen, his voice carrying a hint of light-heartedness. "He's done more for me than I expected, too. Hard to explain, but having him around, it's good." They ate dinner together, plates balanced on the tabletop, sharing bites of spicy curry and sipping from mismatched cups. The dog dozed at their feet, eyes half closed as though lulled by the comforting smells of garlic and coconut milk. Conversation flowed easily, moving from stories of Calantha's childhood summers spent in a small lakeside town to Xander's youthful adventures traveling with his uncle, who had once owned an old camper and a seemingly endless fascination with roadside attractions. Each anecdote revealed something deeper about them, a glimpse into their respective histories and the emotional currents that shaped who they were. After they finished eating, Xander cleared the plates, insisting she stay put. She teased that he was spoiling her, but secretly she relished the small kindnesses, the simple way he handed her an extra napkin when sauce threatened to drip, or how he filled her water glass before she even realized it was empty. Once the dishes were done, he opened a narrow door near the kitchen to reveal a modest balcony, inviting her outside to get some fresh air. They stepped into the chilly night, the city's lights twinkling beyond the warehouse district. The balcony overlooked a courtyard dotted with a few struggling potted plants, remnants of summer's greenery. Calantha folded her arms against the nip in the air, and Xander gently draped a spare hoodie over her shoulders. It smelled faintly of sawdust and a subtle undertone of his cologne. She found herself leaning into the warmth of it, wishing they could freeze this moment for a little while. "You ever think about how quickly things can change?" she asked, glancing up at him. "A few weeks ago, we were just two strangers who collided at a party. Now look at us." He exhaled a soft laugh, resting one hand on the railing. "Yeah, I do think about it. It's kind of amazing, and a little scary. I'm not used to sticking around in one place, you know. But with you, it feels. I don't know how to say this without sounding cheesy." She tilted her head, curiosity sparking. "Go on, try me." He looked at her earnestly, the corner of his mouth quirking. "It feels like something worth investing in. Like maybe I don't have to keep moving on to the next thing, because there's actually something grounding me here." His words sent a delicate shiver down her spine. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing gently. "You say you're not used to settling, and I'm not used to taking risks," she said. "Maybe it balances out somehow." They lingered there, hands intertwined, content in the quiet. Soon, however, the brisk air turned colder. The dog let out an impatient whine from inside, probably missing their presence. Taking the cue, they stepped back into the warmth of the apartment. Xander turned on a small lamp in the corner of the living space, casting soft shadows on the walls. Calantha noticed a half-finished wooden frame leaning against the couch. "Another project?" she asked, stepping closer to examine the smooth edges and carefully measured corners. "I thought I'd build a custom dog bed frame," he explained, sounding almost sheepish. "It's simple, just something sturdy enough so he won't feel every movement on the floor. A bit overkill, maybe." She ran her hand over the surface of the wood. "It's not overkill. It's thoughtful. I'm sure he'll love it." He set a hand gently on her shoulder, turning her so she faced him. "I feel like I keep finding excuses to build stuff for other people, or dogs," he said with a lopsided grin, "because building something tangible makes me feel useful." She looked into his eyes and saw the openness that she'd begun to cherish. "Don't worry," she said softly. "I see how much heart you put into everything you do. It's more than just usefulness." For a moment, they stood there, the hum of the refrigerator and the faint city sounds their only background music. Then, unable to resist the growing pull between them, he leaned down to brush a lingering kiss across her lips. She kissed him back with the quiet hunger of someone discovering a new, deeper sense of closeness. Eventually, they drew apart, breath mingling in the silent air. The dog, as though sensing the shift in mood, tottered over and pawed at Xander's leg. Laughing, Calantha stepped back, letting the dog wedge himself between them with a jealous half-bark. "You and your timing," Xander scolded gently, scratching behind the dog's ear. But the slight frustration in his voice was laced with amusement. Calantha glanced at the clock, noticing how late it had become. She hated the idea of leaving the warm cocoon of his apartment, but she had an early shift at the shelter. "I should head home," she said regretfully, picking up her coat. "Tomorrow's a busy day, and we just got a new litter of kittens that need extra attention." Xander walked her to the door, the dog trailing behind them, tail wagging with unbridled enthusiasm. "Drive safe," he told her, voice husky with reluctance. "Text me when you get home, so I know you're all right." She nodded, touched by his concern. "I will. And, Xander, thank you for dinner, for everything. I'm starting to believe that maybe embracing uncertainty isn't such a bad idea after all." His expression softened, and he brushed a feather-light touch across her cheek. "You don't have to face uncertainty alone. We'll figure it out, together." The sincerity of his words lingered with her all the way home. The drive through the quiet streets gave her time to reflect on how, in such a short span, Xander had managed to weave himself into her daily thoughts. She knew not all relationships unfolded so effortlessly, disagreements would inevitably arise, and life's unpredictability would test them. Yet in this moment, she felt the tender joy of possibility. When she finally parked in front of her house, she turned off the engine and sat for a minute, inhaling the stillness of the night. Then she pulled out her phone, typing a quick message, "Home safe. Good night." She paused, a small smile tugging at her lips before adding, "Sweet dreams, from both me and your furry roommate." Her heart pounded with a gentle sort of hope as she sent the text. She suspected that sleep might elude her for a while, her mind too full of Xander's voice, the press of his kiss, and the velvety warmth of his apartment. Still, as she finally slipped under her blankets, she let out a slow, contented sigh. In this quiet transition between one day and the next, she felt more alive than ever, eager to see how their intertwined paths would continue to unfold. Calantha woke to an unnerving buzz of anxiety in her stomach. The day before had been perfectly ordinary. She managed the usual tasks at the shelter, shared quick updates with Xander about the dog, and exchanged a few light-hearted messages before bed. Yet, sometime during the night, a knot of unease had coiled in her chest. She couldn't pinpoint why she felt this way, but it tugged at her thoughts while she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her hair and trying to smooth the dark circles beneath her eyes. She decided to shake it off as simple restlessness and headed to the shelter, determined to channel her energy into the animals waiting for breakfast. Once there, she helped organize the morning routine, double-checking feeding charts and ensuring that each cage in the adoption wing was clean. Dr. Pierce approached her with a clipboard, rattling off a list of upcoming medical procedures. Calantha answered automatically, but her mind kept drifting, half listening for a phone notification that never came. Xander usually texted her something silly or sweet by mid-morning, a snapshot of the dog sunning himself on the rug, or a half-joking complaint about how quickly a new chew toy had been destroyed. Today, though, her phone stayed silent. By noon, she found herself increasingly on edge, replaying her recent conversations with Xander to see if she'd missed any signs of tension. She remembered the tenderness in his eyes the night before last, the comforting weight of his arm around her shoulders, and the way they'd laughed at the dog's clumsy attempts to chase a squeaky ball across the apartment floor. None of it suggested anything amiss. Yet the knot in her chest only tightened. She recognized that she might be overreacting, but the sense of foreboding refused to fade. That afternoon, while prepping some adoption packets, her friend and colleague Abilene leaned against the reception counter with a sympathetic tilt to her head. "You look worried," Abilene remarked quietly, scanning the busy corridor. "Is everything all right?" Calantha hesitated, her fingers curling around the folder she was holding. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have this weird feeling something's off. Xander hasn't called, and he's usually so reliable about checking in." Abilene gave a gentle shrug. "Maybe his phone died, or work ran late. Don't panic yet." Then, with a playful nudge, she added, "Don't forget we have a group dinner tomorrow. I'm expecting you to show up with your new beau so I can properly grill him about all his intentions." Her friend's light-hearted teasing made Calantha laugh, though her worry didn't fully subside. She finished her tasks with an air of distraction, occasionally sneaking a look at her phone in case a text or missed call might have slipped through. By the time she ended her shift, the small flicker of dread had grown into an uncomfortable burn. Xander's silence was completely unlike him. With trembling fingers, she finally dialed his number, only for it to ring and ring before going to voicemail. She left a brief message, trying to sound casual and upbeat, though her voice wavered near the end, then tucked her phone away, telling herself to stop obsessing. On her drive home, she contemplated swinging by his apartment. Was that too pushy? She glanced at the clock on the dashboard. Late afternoon traffic clogged the main roads, and she knew that if she diverted from her usual route, it would add another hour to her commute. In the end, she decided to be patient and let him respond in his own time. Perhaps there really was a simple explanation, and she just needed to give him space. Later that evening, after she'd forced herself through a bland dinner and tried, unsuccessfully, to lose herself in a new novel, her phone buzzed. Relief flared in her chest when she saw Xander's name. She snatched it up, heart pounding, only to see a short message that read, "We need to talk. Can I come by?" There were no playful emojis, no reassurance. The concise phrasing made her mouth go dry. She typed back a quick, "Of course. I'll be home all night," then waited in a daze. 20 minutes later, she spotted his truck pulling up to the curb, headlights illuminating her darkened living room. She braced herself, opening the door before he even had a chance to knock. He looked tired, a shadow of unease deepening the lines around his eyes. She stepped aside to let him in, feeling the chill of the evening air cling to her skin. The dog wasn't with him, and she realized how strange that seemed. He usually took every opportunity to have the dog tag along. Though she wanted to greet him with a hug or a reassuring touch, the palpable tension in his stance held her back. They stood in the small living room, lamplight casting long, unsteady shadows on the walls. She noticed him clenching and unclenching his hands, as though sorting out what to say. Finally, he exhaled and brought his gaze to hers. "I got cornered at a bar last night by someone I used to know," he began, voice low. "It wasn't planned, and it threw me off. I'm sorry I didn't call." A swirl of relief and unease gripped her. "Is that all? You were out with an old friend?" Xander shook his head, tension rippling through him. "She wasn't really a friend. More like someone I dated a while back. It ended badly." His eyes darted away, shame flickering in their depths. "She showed up out of nowhere, told me she'd heard I was settling down, said she wanted to catch up or something. One thing led to another, and we ended up talking more than I should have allowed." Calantha's fingers tightened around the back of the chair she was standing beside. She struggled to keep her voice steady. "Talking about what, exactly?" He hesitated, clearly aware that his explanation would carry weight. "We had a complicated history. She was upset that I never gave us a real chance," her words, not mine, "and she wanted to see if we could rekindle things." He let out a humorless laugh. "As if I hadn't moved on. I tried to make it clear that I'm with you now, that I'm not interested, but she wouldn't accept it. She made a scene, and it got pretty tense. I left before it escalated further, but I felt like an idiot for even letting her talk to me that long. I should have shut it down the moment she approached." Calantha fought to keep her breath even, though a spark of anger and hurt ignited in her chest. "Why didn't you tell me earlier? Even just a quick text, so I wouldn't worry." "I was ashamed," he admitted, raking a hand through his hair. "And I guess part of me thought I could just brush it off, like it never happened. But then I heard rumors, somebody apparently saw us at the bar and assumed the worst, said I was out with another woman, and it twisted into gossip. I didn't want you to hear it from anyone else and get the wrong idea." She stood there, grappling with the sudden fear that everything could crumble because of a single night's misunderstanding. Though he'd confessed, there was an ache in her throat at the thought that he might be drawn back into something he'd never fully resolved. She searched his face for any sign of deception, any hint that he might not be telling the whole truth. Instead, she saw a raw honesty, perhaps even desperation, begging her to believe him. Finally, she cleared her throat. "I appreciate that you came to me. But you hurt me by shutting me out all day. I was worried sick. If we're going to build something real, I need you to be open with me, even if you're scared." He nodded, his features softening in relief, though his eyes were still clouded with guilt. "I know. I'm sorry. I've never been good at dealing with my past. I tend to run or ignore it. But I don't want to be that person with you. I want us to face things head on." Calantha's emotions warred within her, but the underlying current of love she felt toward him gave her the courage to step forward. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the tension slowly seep out of him as he drew her close. For a moment, they stood in silence, the faint sound of a passing car outside the only reminder that the world hadn't paused. "I'm not going to pretend it's easy to hear," she said at last, her cheek pressed to his chest. "But I believe you. Just, promise me no more shutting me out." He pressed his lips to the top of her head, murmuring, "I promise." They stayed like that for a long time, the lamplight casting gentle halos around them, breathing in the quiet reassurance of each other's presence. Eventually, she pulled away, leading him to sit on the worn couch. He took her hand, and she noticed his grip was still slightly trembling. "Tell me more," she said softly. "About her, about what happened before me." He let out a shaky breath, recounting fragments of a turbulent relationship from years ago, how it burned hot and fast, then collapsed under its own weight. She listened intently, feeling pangs of compassion and occasional stings of jealousy. Yet, with every sentence, it became clearer that Xander had left that part of his life behind, even if he hadn't fully processed the emotional scars it left him with. By the time he finished talking, the tension in the room had lifted, replaced by a hushed awareness of the vulnerability they had just navigated together. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "I won't pretend it's easy for me to hear about, but I'd rather know the truth than live in doubt." He nodded, relief etched into his expression. "I don't want anything to come between us. Especially not a ghost from my past." The hours slipped by as they talked it through, weaving the threads of confusion into a tapestry of understanding. At one point, she made them both tea, carrying 2 steaming mugs back into the living room. They sipped in reflective silence, the closeness between them a quiet promise that they would try to handle life's curveballs together. Though her hurt hadn't vanished entirely, she felt a renewed sense of trust taking shape, fragile yet determined. When he finally rose to leave, it was past midnight. She walked him to the door, the air near the threshold cold enough to make them both shiver. He took her face in his hands, his gaze intense with unspoken apology, then leaned in for a kiss that tasted of acceptance and lingering sadness. She returned it with tentative hope, willing her heart to remain open. "Text me when you're home safe," she said, using the same line he always offered her. He managed a faint smile, brushing his thumb across her cheek. "I will," he promised, lingering for just a heartbeat before stepping out into the night. She stood in the doorway, watching as his truck's taillights disappeared into the darkness. Her emotions were a tangled knot, relief, unease, tenderness, and the faint sting of betrayal all mingled. Yet underlying everything was a fierce, fragile determination to make this work. She closed the door, locked it, and leaned against the wood, inhaling a shaky breath. In that moment, she knew their relationship had crossed a threshold. Trust, she realized, wasn't just about the easy moments of laughter and comfort, it was about choosing each other through the storms, as imperfect as they might be. Though sleep came fitfully that night, each time she woke, she reminded herself of the look in his eyes and the raw sincerity in his voice. She sensed that they were forging a bond stronger than any fleeting conflict, a bond defined by honesty, even when it hurt. And if their love had been unexpected from the start, maybe that was precisely why it held such promise. It was growing roots in the unlikeliest of places, willing to weather whatever challenges came its way. In the days following Xander's late-night confession, Calantha felt as though she and Xander had arrived at a new phase of their relationship, one where uncomfortable truths were no longer brushed aside but faced head-on. The uneasy memory of his ex-girlfriend casting a shadow over their happiness still lingered in the background, yet they continued forward, determined not to let an old ghost unravel what they were building. Despite their mutual resolve, a subdued tension hung in the air, a reminder that trust could be fragile and precious. The week was hectic on all fronts. The shelter received a sudden influx of rescues, 4 dogs and a handful of kittens, that needed urgent attention. Calantha found herself racing between enclosures, taking phone calls from prospective adopters, and updating Dr. Pierce on which animals needed immediate vaccinations. Every now and then, she and Xander exchanged texts, short affirmations of "thinking of you" or updates on his continuing battle to keep his newly made dog bed intact. The rescued pup apparently had developed a taste for gnawing on wooden corners. Yet neither of them brought up the confrontation with his ex, and the emotional fallout from that night remained tucked away, waiting to be processed more fully. On Thursday, as the workweek neared its end, Abilene reminded Calantha that their group dinner was still on the calendar. "You're not chickening out on bringing Xander, right?" her friend teased, a mischievous gleam in her eye. "He promised me I could grill him, and I fully intend to do so." Calantha had laughed it off at first, but apprehension gnawed at her. Xander, for his part, reacted with a measure of anxiety when she told him about the dinner. "You know I'm usually okay in social situations," he admitted, running a hand through his hair, "but this feels important, like I'm meeting your entire crew. I don't want them to think badly of me." "Relax," she assured him, gently stroking the back of his hand. "They're just curious. Besides, if you survived meeting me at a random party, you can handle my coworkers." He cracked a small smile, leaning in to press a light kiss on her temple. "All right, I'm game. Let's do it." That Friday evening, Calantha and Xander arrived at a cozy family-owned restaurant tucked into a row of small shops. White string lights glowed in the windows, and the savory aroma of roasted garlic and herbs drifted out every time the door swung open. She introduced Xander to her friends, Abilene, Dr. Pierce, and a few other shelter staff who'd become fixtures in Calantha's life. While they all wore easy smiles, there was a definite sense of evaluation in the air. Abilene, in particular, had an almost comical intensity in her gaze, as if she were mentally noting every word that came out of Xander's mouth. The group squeezed into a large booth in the back, the walls decorated with vibrant paintings of pastoral scenes. Warm light glinted off the polished wood table, reflecting the swirling patterns etched into it. As the chatter rose around them, discussions about upcoming community fundraisers, stories of bizarre pet antics, gentle ribbing over shared memories, Xander surprised Calantha by jumping right into the mix. He talked about his construction projects and joked about how the rescued dog acts like he pays the rent. Within minutes, even the skeptical volunteers found themselves charmed by his low-key humor and the candid way he described his life. Calantha watched him with a growing sense of awe. This was a side of Xander she hadn't fully seen. He was still friendly and spontaneous, but also earnest and self-reflective when he spoke about how finding the dog had changed his perspective on stability. At one point, Dr. Pierce asked a pointed question, "Any chance you're going to adopt him permanently, or is this just a temporary arrangement?" The entire table fell silent, forks pausing midair. Xander shifted in his seat, glancing at Calantha before answering. "I've been thinking a lot about that, actually," he confessed, a slight tremor in his voice. "Part of me wondered if I was biting off more than I could chew, especially given my track record of jumping from project to project. But, honestly, I can't imagine my place without him anymore. So unless the shelter wants him back," he ended his statement with an expectant look at Calantha, who felt her heart melt at his words. "We'll have to see if you pass our home inspection," Calantha teased, relief and pride flooding her tone. Everyone laughed, and conversation resumed, meandering through light-hearted topics like the best hiking spots in the area and the funniest ways people named their pets. Dinner stretched into dessert, and eventually, people began trickling out one by one. Abilene gave Xander a final wink and a thumbs up, clearly won over, before disappearing into the cool night. That left only Calantha and Xander standing near the restaurant's front door, the swirl of cold air brushing in whenever someone passed through. He slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Well," he murmured, tilting his head toward the street, "that went better than I expected." She leaned into him. "I'm proud of you. And I'm pretty sure everyone else is, too." Abilene hardly ever gives a date the thumbs up, she's usually more likely to cross-examine them until they run for the hills. Xander let out a soft laugh, guiding her outside under the string lights. They walked for a block or so, hands clasped, the crisp autumn breeze sending leaves scuttling across the pavement. The glow of street lamps illuminated the tenderness in his face every time he looked at her. Despite the joyous mood after dinner, Calantha sensed that something was brewing beneath his calm demeanor, a certain tightness in his posture that hinted at nerves. When they reached her car, she turned to face him. "You okay?" she asked softly, searching his eyes. He hesitated, then nodded, though she saw uncertainty flicker there. "I've just been thinking a lot about us lately, about what it means to be in this for the long haul. After everything that happened with my ex showing up and all the chaos that caused, I realized I don't want any doubts left hanging in the air. I want to show you that I'm all in." A surge of warmth rushed through her, warring with a tingle of apprehension. "And how do you plan to show me that?" Instead of answering, he drew her into a gentle, lingering kiss, the streetlight casting a soft halo around them. When he pulled back, his hand slid into his pocket. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he might be reaching for a ring, and her breath caught in her throat. But what he produced instead was a small, neatly folded piece of paper. She took it with trembling fingers. "What's this?" "It's a lease," he explained quietly. "A place with an extra room, bigger kitchen, actually near the shelter. I signed it this morning. I'm not saying you have to move in right away, but I wanted you to know I'm making a home, something more permanent." She unfolded the paper, scanning the address and the terms, the reality settling in. He'd made a leap she'd never have expected of him. A swirl of emotions, shock, excitement, a bit of fear, rocked her. "You mean, you did this for us?" she asked, voice unsteady. "I did it for me too," he admitted with a small smile. "I want a stable place to keep building my life. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hoping you'd be part of it. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but someday." Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. She remembered how unsettled she'd felt at the beginning, worried that his wanderlust would always keep him from forming real ties. Now he was offering proof that he wanted to stay, and stay with her. Carefully, she refolded the paper and held it against her heart. "I'm not sure what to say," she managed, her voice trembling. He brushed a tear from her cheek with the pad of his thumb. "You don't have to say anything. Just think about it, okay?" Nodding, she leaned forward to rest her forehead against his. In the past, she might have questioned how something so profoundly significant could happen in so little time. But their entire relationship had defied expectations from the start. In that moment, she felt the glorious, dizzying truth that sometimes the heart recognizes what it needs without waiting for rational analysis. They lingered under the street lamp, locked in an embrace that felt deeper than words could capture. A car horn honked somewhere behind them, snapping them out of the spell. Reluctantly, she stepped back, still clutching the lease in her hand. The idea of forging a shared future both thrilled and unsettled her, yet she could feel a powerful certainty stirring, perhaps the surest certainty she'd ever known. When they parted ways that night, she drove home feeling like her entire world had shifted. The old knot of anxiety was gone, replaced by a blossoming hope that hummed through her veins. She remembered the early nights of quiet caution, how she'd hesitated to let Xander into her life. Now, the thought of being without him felt unthinkable. In the quiet darkness of her bedroom, she opened the folded lease again, running her fingertips over the words as if they might reveal more than just rental terms. It wasn't a formal proposal, not exactly, but it was a promise of a shared tomorrow, a place where they could watch the rescued dog chase toys down a hallway free of clutter, where she could read her novels curled up against his side, and where the daily hum of life could be something they built together. For a moment, her mind drifted to the first spark that had ignited between them, that slap of frustration, the impulsive closeness, and the stolen kiss at the party. It was a moment that had felt shocking and forbidden in its sudden intensity. But from that jolt of adrenaline had come something infinitely sweeter, love born out of the courage to break down personal walls, to confront jealousy and doubt, to embrace life with all its beautiful messiness. She closed her eyes, tucking the lease into her nightstand. Tomorrow, they would start to figure out the details. They would discuss timelines, budgets, and how to blend their routines. But tonight, she let herself bask in the realization that real love, unexpected, sometimes turbulent, often wonderful, had found her. And with that final thought, she drifted into a dreamless sleep, a quiet, steady belief in her heart that no matter what storms might come, they had chosen each other, and that choice was stronger than any fear.